Hi, everybody. Welcome to L&D Talk. My name is Brent Schlenker. I'm your host, and I am the Chief Learning Officer at Litmus.com. Today is Wednesday, and it, for the near and foreseeable future, will now be, I can't remember what we would call it, but the Business of Learning Wednesday. How about that? Oh, you know what I wrote is Tuesday on the title. Oops.
Oh, man.
Okay, so I have to fix that. But anyways, hi, AJ, our co-host.
Yep. Hi, Brent.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, you know, I'm obviously a little cloudy-headed this morning, but
why is that, Brent?
I have no idea. Let's not get started on that. I have a perfectly good excuse for.
I'm sure you do. Okay, shake it off. Let's go.
Shake it off.
Everybody in the chat room, shake it off. Let's go.
All right, let me start over. Hi, everybody. Welcome to L&D Talk. I'm your host. And
you sound like the guy on Simpsons. Hi, everybody. Dr. Nick. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all good. So, in case anybody watching the recording was wondering, Ajay has decided to be my co-host every Wednesday. And so we will be talking business of learning, the administration of learning, the work, the job side of learning, all of that stuff that is in addition to the work of creating learning content and creating solutions. There's all of the other stuff that we as professionals have to deal with and understand. And all too often we don't. And so Wednesday will be devoted to talking about all of those things. And today we've decided that we're going to talk about, kick off this first Business Wednesday, talking about, I want to call it managing up, but that's not it. Getting
a buy-in from your leaders for your e-learning or m-learning or whatever you want to call your initiatives.
There you go. So buy-in, getting buy-in from your leadership or whomever you need approval from to actually implement the ideas, the killer ideas that we all get, right? All the exciting new tools that we have to work with, all of our whole toolbox of solutions that are now available to us from social learning platforms to SaaS-based learning management systems to authoring tools to media development tools.
Buying thousands of tablets for your employees.
That's right. Yes, buying hardware and all of those crazy solutions that I'm certain have been proposed at one time or another. So we have a good collection of guests in the live chat as well. So everybody feel free to comment as we go along. But let's start with talking about maybe, let's just sort of lay the groundwork for what normally happens when we attempt to get approvals.
Okay.
How do you see that?
Okay, so I think where we get confused, when I say we, I'm talking about L&D in general, is, we look at training, we look at learning and that initiative, and we look at it in a holistic sense. But leaders are looking at it from different. I can't even talk this morning. They don't look holistically. They look they break it up, and so it's because is the way they're educated. And let me start with this. What L&D people fail to realize that your leaders are actually formally educated in business and finance and accounting and all that wonderful stuff that a lot of us try to avoid. But these people look at things in their business as contributing to the business, whether it's a direct contribution, financially, monetarily, or it's something that's indirect, a lot of what we do. But what happens is, so here's a scenario, right? Let's pick on Litmus for a second, right? Somebody comes to, an L&D person comes to Litmus and says, hey, we need an LMS. Okay. So Litmus goes in and, sends a quote and ask all the right questions. And then the L&D person has to say, okay, yeah, we want to buy it, but I got to get the approval from, my, chief operating officer or my CFO or the head of the department, whatever it is. And they go and they run there and they say, look, this LMS is going to cost us this much. Let's just do it. What they fail to realize is that there's going to be a bunch of questions going to be coming right back at them. And the first one is going to be why, right? I mean, why do we need this? And you can set up your arguments all you want. The first thing that they're going to look at is, okay, why do we need this? How are we going to use it? And what is it going to contribute to your organization? So what we need to do is separate out the equipment from, meaning the infrastructure, like the Litmus LMS, from the actually learning initiative. And those are the two separate components that when you're proposing a project to your leadership, you have to separate those two components because your leaders look at it in two different ways. And I think that's the first place you need to start, is to say to yourself, okay, what is infrastructure and what is the learning component? And keep those two separate at the time being. Not in your solution, not in your proposal, but just when you're presenting it to people, like your leaders. First step. Sorry.
So I think this is where it gets kind of tricky for smaller departments. So maybe we can, because I think having these types of conversations about the business and the work of a training department, I think gets confusing and frustrating for people because of this very, very broad gamut of what we call training, or the people that are responsible for training, or the different departments and the different divisions, right? So for example, you may have one specific training department just focused on, or one person just focused on product training for a particular division. And they're solely focused on creating the training for the customer base, the sales and the channel partners, and making sure that everybody understands and learns how to sell the product, how to position the product, how to talk about the product, or how to use the product. And then you have your internal employees that need to be trained, and we have training departments that support those. And so I'll just leave it, I'll keep it really simple and leave it at those two separations. So you've got your product type training and you've got your employee training, and both, I think, need to be handled, or are handled, a little bit differently because they go through different leadership structures. The money to support them comes out of different budgets, right? So how would you recommend distinguishing that? Am I?
No, okay. So let me, and full disclosure, by the way, Brent, I think you know my background, but full disclosure, I'm a CPA, so I come from a finance and accounting background. So let's start with your scenario. If you're pitching the training itself, number one, your leaders recognize for them, by the way, from an accounting perspective and from a finance perspective, I know L&D people hate hearing this, but in their minds, the first thing that they go to is that training is an expense. And it doesn't matter what you're training or who you're training or whatever it is, if you're training, actually the activity of training, that is an line expense. And that is not a bad word. It's a 4-letter word, it's called cost. And what we need to start accepting is that from a business mind, from that formal education, cost is a way of classifying activities within a business. It's not a bad thing. The same thing we say profit centers, cost centers, investment centers. They are allocating things in their mind a certain way of understanding how to treat them in the organization. Because they call you costs and expenses, they're not denigrating you. They're not talking down to you. They're in their mind, they're just saying, your cost, you're an expense to us. This is how we're treating you. So we can't measure basically a return on investment. We're not supposed to, by the way, by formal educational standards, we're not supposed to measure ROI on expenses or costs. They are items that happen and are gone. But what they need to do, the question that you need to respond to them is how is it contributing to the business? So I know Paul put up, make money for us. It's not about making money. Is that how are we directly contributing to the improving of the performance? So if we're selling products, for example, let's take a sales department, right? They're selling a product. Well, what is the specific need identified for these salespeople to improve? Is it because they're not closing sales? So we target on developing a training program just on closing sales. Now, you can make a direct correlation if you wanted to say, our training, helped them close 10% more sales over the last quarter. But that's unfair because there's a lot of other factors that play in the business. And if you paint yourself in a corner, by the way, and you say you're going to take the whole credit for that success, first of all, you're undercutting the other components of the business that are contributing to it, and you're not making any friends. And number two, when your next training goes south, they're going to say, well, wait a minute, you took credit for the last one. Why aren't you taking credit for the loss here?
So when things go bad,
yeah,
training's fault then.
Yeah, we're like cockroaches, right? When the nuclear war happens, we come out and say, and I don't mean that as an insult, by the way, because people are going to be calling me a cockroach. No, we come out and take the glory, but then when something bad happens, we're not to be found, and
Right.
So we can't do that. What we have to do is show how we're contributing to that effort, and what accountability do we have to making that improvement. And it is an expense to them when it comes to training activity. But the other side of the coin is now, if you're going to start asking, okay, we're going to train those salespeople on closing, but we need a new e-learning software, or we need to have, I don't know, a tracking system, an IT tracking system to show how our needs assessment is correlating with the sales closures. This becomes infrastructure. Now, guess what? That's no longer a cost or an expense. That's actually an investment into the business. And that's a long-term investment. And from an accounting standpoint, that's where the ROI happens. Now, let the chat go wild.
Well, no, this is good. So I have this very bad habit of trying to oversimplify things. And mostly I do it just for my own reasons
I'm with you.
To try to understand it. And so I think one of the places where we get caught up is I think we have a tendency to skip over what was the initial trigger in the first place that the business decided we need a training department, or we need training, or we need this. Because at some point within every business, there is no training department. There is no official line item. It's just an activity that somebody decides needs to happen, and somebody gets said, told, or they say, hey, I'll take care of it. And it just gets done either by volunteering or word of mouth, whatever. But at some point, somebody says, this needs to be formalized. It's getting too much. Let's allocate some of our budget for this entire business, and let's create another cost center item, and we'll call it training.
Yep.
Now, can somebody please tell us how much money we should put towards that?
Yep.
And then we move forward. Am I explaining that?
I don't know why we think we're so special, because an organization is composed of a lot of cost centers. So you look, I come from finance accounting background. You look in a company, a finance department. The finance department, the people who are managing the money for their leaders are considered a cost center, or an expense to the company. The marketing department typically is more of an expense, a cost center to the business than a profit center. The only profit centers that exist in the business are the ones that are actually selling the actual product or services to the customer. Typically, I mean, I'm being generalistic here. There's some variations to this, but in general, that's the case. So to your point, Brent, when you look at a department, yes, sometimes, in a small business, it comes out of fruition and people just say, let's start training, and we start spending money, and it becomes a line item. And then finally we do a lot of it in the business, and the business grows. And now suddenly, well, we need to hire a training manager, right, to manage all of this. And the training manager hires a coordinator, and the coordinator hires some people. So now you have a staff of 5 to 10 people. So now that all becomes a cost center because it's a need to the organization. And that's the simplicity of it. The tricky part of it, and then what drives me nuts, and by the way, let me share my little soapbox right now, Brent.
Okay.
This whole ROI crap that goes on in our business, a finance department is not measured on ROI. Marketing department, well, that's a little tricky because now they are starting to be measured on ROI because they can track exactly who's buying what and how the ads are being affected, especially with the e-based business. But go back 10 years before Facebook and LinkedIn and all this kind of stuff. Go back to when it was just ads on TV. They couldn't track the ROI of how many Tide boxes did we sell. So they were typically considered an expense in a cost center that was not measured on ROI. That being said, why are we chasing our tails trying to measure ROI of a training activity? And then we go further than that. We actually now make up formulas of return on investment that business leaders who are trained at business schools have never seen before. And their ROI formulas are a lot different from what we see. And they're used for different purposes than what we use it for. And so that's where it becomes really tricky. So the simplicity of it is, if you're going to show a benefit to your organization, and I know quite a few people on the chat hopefully agree with me on this. I know Don and Shannon are probably of the same mindset here. But you got to show how you contribute to the key performance measures of the client you're helping to improve their department. You know what I'm saying? Yep. Performance metrics are all over the place. And how do we tie into those performance metrics is, if you want to call it that, is how we prove our return on what we do for that organization. I hate to say the word investment. But the side that gets tricky is the equipment part, the infrastructure part.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So everybody, we need to measure ourselves and the work we do, but that doesn't mean that those measurements that we kind of track our own efforts by, it doesn't mean that anybody else cares about them. Unless, so this would be the part where I think it might change a little bit. And that's when we decide, or because of something that's happening in the business, maybe it's growing really fast line, for whatever reason, now the training to go to the powers that be and say, this budget that you've given us in our cost center is not enough. We'd like some more, please. Is that the time when ROI might creep into the conversation, or is that not the right term?
Sorry, Brent, you cut out there for a second because now I only got you in audio. I don't even see your face anymore. I think that's my bandwidth, possibly. So you cut out a bit in the middle. So what were you defining ROI as? I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, not defining it, but just saying. So I'm good with you on the not really needing to talk about the ROI or the justification too much to the bean counters and to management, because we're a cost center. There's a certain amount of money allocated to it, and we need to, for our purposes, we like to know that we're doing good things for the company and that we're improving things within the business that triggers us to say, wow, I really need some more resources, and that means more money. And so I'm going to go back to leadership and say, thank you so much for this budget that you've given us. But because of all of these things, we need to increase that budget. So isn't that the point, another trigger point, where we might need to talk about some sort of ROI or value proposition?
Yeah, and this is where let me just say this. Start with a Janet Jackson quote. What have you done for me lately? Is the question they're going to be asking you with the budget, right? We have to be careful of the language we use, especially with business leaders. If we're going for budget reviews and asking for more money, we're not going to drop the word ROI on them, because it's like, I don't know. Half my family's from India. I mean, I wasn't raised Indian, but when I went to India last time, my cousin did this to me. He taught me a few phrases in Hindi, and said, use these on people when you meet people. And he taught me them. And then I went up to somebody. He goes, "There's somebody you want to write this phrase on." And I went up. I spoke the phrase, and I almost got my head knocked off because he was playing a joke on me. Now, I hate to use that extreme of analogy, but you start using the word ROI in these weird terms that business leaders understand one way and say, look, this is what we proved as far as return on investment. Their mind goes somewhere else and what that means. And we are saying something different. So when we decide to say, hey, we need more money in our budget because we do great things, well, then the business leader is going to say, well, show us what those great things are. How did you help us contribute to improving performance of the organization? And that's the point where you have to key in on those performance metrics. I've done it. I mean, I'm not saying this to talk in vagaries, or what's the word? Not vagaries. Is that vague? I don't know. Anyways, in essence terms, but
right. But let me just stop you right there, and let's do this little dialing it back and keeping it stupid simple.
Okay.
Exercise. Okay, so what I'm starting to sort of craft in my mind is seeing this idea of in some people's minds, some of the things that you just said. So we need to prove how we've impacted performance. We need to show the value that we've added to the business and those things, and not not in any of the phrasing that you used did you use the word ROI.
Never.
But, and maybe the live chat can help me out here, it's my belief that all of those things that you said without using the word ROI in our industry, to a great extent, exactly what you said is bucketed under that phrasing and the ROI conversation.
But Brent, let me interrupt. It's the word return. It's not the word investment. I mean, we use the terms investment in our everyday lives generically. That's not an issue. And I think we all have a comprehension of what the word investment means. The word that's really tricky is the word return. And the word return in a accounting and finance context, and I know people are going to start screaming at me and saying, well, Ajay, we're not talking accounting and finance. Yeah, but the audience you're speaking to is interpreting it that way. Yeah. And that's the problem. And it's not that they're sitting here, oh, I hear the word return and it's got to be an accounting context. They've been formally brainwashed. I hate to use that word, but when you go to school for 3 or 4 years in finance and accounting, you are ingrained of what return means. And it doesn't mean what we think it means. And that's the problem right now. Return. So we can't say return on investment. We need to say return on performance or return on something different that's going to demonstrate the value we deliver. And that will sort of differentiate. And some people are going to claim in the chat that this is semantics, Ajay. Well, it can be semantics, but it's not. When it comes down to it, you're going to be talking vastly different language, different context. I think Shannon said there was a different context, different audience, different context. And that's the issue. We can talk about it in our own space, you, me, and everybody else in L&D, talk about ROI, and we'll maybe understand what it means. But when we leave our little silo, we need to start rephrasing that. That's the issue.
Yeah, I agree, and it sounds like the chat is in agreement with you there too. And it does kind of sound at times like it's just a semantics argument, but I think to a certain extent it is. And then on the other hand, it's just sort of the reality. But the words we use, like you said.
Let me share, Brent, quickly, sorry to interrupt. Let me just share with you ROI. Here's the context of ROI, okay, from a business leader's perspective. So at the beginning, we started off with the litmus investing, they buy a litmus system and get into the organization. Great. Well, that piece of equipment, they don't care if it's an LMS, if it's a fleet of cars, or if it's a building, or whatever it is, it's a piece of equipment. A piece of equipment goes into the long-term portion of the balance sheet of liabilities. And when we treat it that way, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole too far, but when we treat it that way, it's because it's meant to have a multi-time frame purpose, whether it's years or whatever it is, right? It's going to be put in. It's not there for today. It's there for a couple of years. And when you start investing, $100,000, $500,000, $1 million on LMSs, or even you just buy, 6 laptops for $20,000. Guess what? That becomes a long-term asset to the organization. That piece of equipment is not contributing directly to profitability, but it's in the balance sheet. It's indirectly contributing to profitability for being there, just like your desk, like your chairs. And that's where the term ROI. And now, when I start saying ROI in that context, I can blow people's minds when I start showing them, and you've probably seen it, Brent, things like net present value analysis, internal rates of return, all these fancy calculations that are not just learned in school, but are actually used, are placed on these pieces of equipment. And I'm going down a rabbit hole, so I'm sorry about this.
No, it's a good rabbit hole, and we don't have to go down too far into the weeds on it, but it's important to know that when I spoke earlier before I hit the record button about these conversations, I think need to happen in our industry. And this idea of really the future of our business and the future of what we do and the next hot technology that we really need is an app or a system that does this kind of work for us, whatever those algorithms are. If for example, if your training department, and I know a lot of companies still have this, you may not have a full-blown corporate university like the giant buildings that like Motorola and other big companies had in the past, but you still might be given a separate building or a bunch of separate conference rooms. All of those conference rooms have furniture, have whiteboards, have overhead projectors, And
Yep.
so understanding as the leader, whether you're just the training manager or whether you're the CLO or director of training, whatever, I think a lot of times when we get moved up into those roles, we forget that there's costs associated with all of that. And then when you buy all that stuff, to your point, from an accounting perspective, all of that stuff becomes investment or
Yep.
part of
Exactly.
the business.
It is. It is investment. You're right. I mean, I remember when I got my mind blown. Have you ever been to one of these? I deal with a lot of the finance and accounting industry, and I got off the floor in Toronto, the head office of KPMG in Canada, and I got off. I think it was at 11th or 15th floor of the tower in downtown Toronto. Walked off the elevators, walked into this training floor. It was a huge floor of a skyscraper that just had training rooms, electronic whiteboards, everything you just said, Brent, and more, right? Everything. It was state of the art. And I stood back and said, in my mind, the first thing I said, the CLO of this organization knows what they're doing. And they know how they're talking in the accounting department and the finance department, who are all putting money into this. The CEO knows the value of what's contributing to this organization because everything on this floor is state of the art. And of course, KPMG is a knowledge-driven organization, right? That's all they sell is knowledge. So they have to be investing in people constantly. But it was just amazing to see that. And it doesn't matter. Like, I use KPMG, but to your point, Brent, let's go small. A small company decides to buy 2 desktop computers because they want to do, or 2 laptops or tablets, whatever the trend is right now, for $10,000 or $5,000. That's still an investment in equipment for the long-term viability of the organization. And you better justify why you need those 2 laptops or 10 tablets or whatever it may be.
I did that kind of work early on in my career, but I was far too green and far too new and far too fresh on the totem pole of hierarchy. I basically put together and launched a whole entire training room. But this was back in the day when, most people didn't really have computers at home. At least many of the standard workers didn't. And so you would build these training rooms and it would be tables and tables and tables and load them up with computers. I had no idea where the money was coming from, how we did it, anything like that. I just told them what we needed, talked with the IT department, told them what would be, what we could really use from a learning perspective, right? And from all of the different types of technology that I wanted to help implement at this company. And I just wanted to make sure that everything that they purchased had all that right stuff, right? This was back when the standard corporate computer didn't come with a graphics card and didn't come with a sound card, right? You actually had to ask for that stuff, or else you got stuck with some basic generic box and now you couldn't do multimedia, right? All that stuff was really, really critical, but I hadn't thought of how all of that stuff works. So later on in my career, when I started getting up into management roles, it was really sort of a shock for me to kind of all of a sudden realize all of the work that goes into managing those investments and the purchasing of all of that product and scheduling installs and all that, and then maintenance, right? At a certain point, those rooms, those floors of giant skyscrapers, need to be maintained. And so even the janitorial service, sure, maybe the corporation pays for it, one service for the whole entire building, but there might be certain aspects of it that need to be specialized, and that comes out of your budget for your particular area. And just all of those little things that I think that we tend to think somebody else is going to take care of.
That's the point, Brent. I mean, there's a couple of things you brought up very quickly. If you're a learning professional or practitioner, you are. Do you hear me? Is my audio okay?
Oh yeah, I can hear you. You're shaking a little bit.
Okay, that's my computer. Sorry. So
that's right.
If it's all the minutia, but if you're going to escalate in the L&D business and you want to start running a department, you need to start understanding this stuff. Now, it doesn't matter what level, if you're CLO or training manager, training coordinator, or even instructional designer. You said something key that really gets under my skin, because L&D doesn't really want to recognize this all the time. Again, being generalistic, I might be preaching to the choir here on the chat room, but a lot of departments don't know where their money is coming from. And guess where it's coming from? It's coming from other departments internal paying you. And I'll give you a very quick story. I think I told you this, Brent, but I used to manage a department of 20 people. And I used to remember my boss saying to me, you're going to send the staff out to get trained. And after 5 or 6 times, when the training department came back and says you have to send the staff again for training, whatever, up the uptime time, I said, no, we're not sending them to training. And my boss got annoyed with me, and he said, why are you not sending them to training? I said, because each time, first of all, the money comes out of my budget. You're on my ass, excuse for language, you're on my ass at the end of the year when I'm not meeting my performance objective because all this money's come out of my budget, and the people have come back and sat in front of your desk and they're not using these skills the way they should be. So why am I paying for something that is not of any value to my department in achieving my objectives? And that's the lesson that we have to remember in L&D, that we're taking somebody else's money, and we better prove to them that when those people sit back in those seats to do their jobs, that they're actually improved in some way, that they become better at what they do, so it helps that business leader, whatever, department manager, whatever it is. And we forget where the money's coming from. Anyways, that's my 2 cents worth.
No, that's a good one. And there's the other small piece of opportunity cost, right? All of those workers could have been getting work done. If they were sales folks, they could have been selling, which is a more highly valued activity than going to training, unfortunately, in a lot of situations, but especially if you know that you're not going to be getting any value from sending them to sit in a room for 2 days on end, and then they're going to come back and just do the same stuff that they did.
It doesn't matter if they take it out of a room or we get them to sit before a 6-hour e-learning course. It's still downtime, and it's ridiculous. So well, it's all good stuff. I mean, this is why I really love having this conversation, and really happy that we're going to do this every Wednesday, because there's a lot of there's a lot of different rabbit holes we could go down, right? And I think a lot of different specifics. Everybody's organization, the work that we all do is slightly different, and there's different case studies, and we all have to approach it differently. So I think this is good. I think this is a good step in the right direction. What would be neat, Brent, if you want to add value? If you want to add value to this conversation, maybe we can ask in the future chats, if somebody is trying to, solve a training issue and trying to get it to their leaders or trying to bring it into our organization, we could use that as a quasi case study and help them solve it in the chat, and maybe have them involved in the chat with us.
That's a great idea. We'll have them come in as a guest, and they can sit in the other hot seat.
Free consultation. There we go.
There you go. Right? That's what we're here. Value add. That's
value add. Thanks, Brent.
All righty. Thank you, Ajay. And it's almost 9 o'clock, so I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you, everybody in the live chat. Really, really appreciate all of you hanging out, and your comments were fantastic as always. For everybody else that's watching this on the video or checking out the archive later, feel free to check us out. Ajay, where can people find you? I know that your @ symbol is wrong.
Yeah, it's at BizLearningDude. We won't get into that story, why it's changed. So I'm on Twitter. I hope you guys can follow me. I'll follow you back. And visit my blog, Workforce Revolution, on blog.centralknowledge.com. And hopefully Brent won't kick me off too soon, but I'll be here every Wednesday with him too.
Yeah, hey, no kicking off going on here. This is fantastic. I love it. So and you can read my blog at litmus.com/blog. We have an event coming up that I will talk about briefly before I hit the record button. The Calidus Cloud Connections event is in Las Vegas coming up in May, and it is shaping up to be a fantastic program. We have Peyton Manning as our keynote speaker, and so it's a little bit different than an association style event. It's a corporate event, so it's a lot fancier and a lot nicer, and there's a lot more there are a lot cooler things that you can do at a corporate event that doesn't normally happen through an association. So if you've never been to a corporate style event, this is a good one to check out. Coming up in May, and you can check that out at litmus.com/C3, C as in cat, the number 3. And with that, I think we're good for today. So thanks for hanging out with us. I got the title wrong. It's Wednesday, not Tuesday, but this will in the future be Wednesday in the Business of Learning with myself and co-host Ajay Pengakar. Thank you very much, everybody. We will talk to you later.